You're jumping into CKCU programming through our audio archive, supported by you, the listener.
You're tuned to the Witching Hours on CKCU 93.1 FM in Ottawa. I'm your host, Kanaska, the big-headed alien Carter. Every single late Monday night, aka early Tuesday morning from 2 until 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Usually talk about anything from the afterlife to politics, extraterrestrial life, and so much more. Tonight on the show, we have Donovan King, who is the owner and founder at Haunted Montreal. He also is a post-colonialism teacher, I believe is how he described it. So I'd like to welcome Donovan King to the show. How are you doing tonight?
Very good. Thank you, Kanaska.
So I met you years ago in Montreal. I think I was playing a show at a venue. I can't remember.
Yes, we were doing the Infringement Festival, and you were one of the performers.
Yes, that's right. Are you still doing that, or is that... not anymore?
Yes, we are still doing it, but it has gone underground for health and safety reasons.
Okay. Makes sense. So now, what made you decide to get into this Haunted Montreal ghost tours thing? What inspired you?
Well, I've been in the haunted acting business since the early 1990s when I met Bob Short. And Bob Short was the Oscar winner for Beetlejuice. And he had set up this huge haunted house in Montreal, but he didn't speak French, and so he needed some help. And so I stepped up and hired him a whole team of French actors, or bilingual actors, I guess you could say. And, I had so much fun in his haunted house because I also acted in it that I thought that this was way more fun than the traditional theater, where the actor usually sits backstage and waits to go on. Here it was like playing around in this haunted environment. And so I was hooked ever since then. And I've been doing, a lot of work in that genre since. I ran the London Dungeon, which is the world's largest horror attraction for a couple of years in the 90s. When I came back here, I worked with Haunted Montreal, which is a ghost tour company in Old Montreal. And then in 2011, I decided to start my own. And Haunted Montreal is a somewhat different concept from Haunted Montreal. And, I still work with them, actually. I work with everyone in the city who does ghost tours. But for us, we take it very, very seriously. We do a blog on the 13th of every month that researches a new ghost story. We have about 250 on our list. We continuously develop new products. We have 3 ghost tours, one on Mount Royal or Odzirage, which is the indigenous name. We have one in Griffintown. We have one in downtown Montreal. And we also just opened a haunted pub crawl for the winter. So we're continuously developing it. We're really trying to put Montreal on the map for haunted tourism because, we only have 3 haunted tour companies here. And there's basically Haunted Montreal and Haunted Montreal. And then the third is a joint collaboration called Secret Montreal or Secret Montreal. And that's more about the red light district. So, we're basically trying to grow the haunted tourism industry because if you go to somewhere like Savannah or New Orleans, we're talking about 50 plus tour options, whereas here in Montreal there's currently about 6. So we're basically trying to grow it and make people aware of these crazy stories.
So what are the locations that you go to, and what are some of the stories that you would be telling on this haunted walk or the haunted pub crawls that you do?
Yes, so Montreal has a lot of haunted pubs. We have over 40 on my list. compared to, say, Dublin, Ireland, a very haunted city, has about 15, and Savannah, Georgia, the most haunted city in America, has about 25. So we have way more. And I actually blogged this 2 months ago. You can read it on the Haunted Montreal blog, and we give a paragraph to each and every one of these establishments. One of them we talk about on the Haunted Montreal pub crawl and on the Haunted Downtown tour is called Club Le Cinq. Which means in English, club number 5, I guess you could say. And what's interesting about the club is it's probably the most haunted building in downtown Montreal. It's been covered by all of the major networks, things like Creepy Canada and Ghost Hunters. And basically, it was a home built for a wealthy family back in the 1850s, but it was acquired in 1902 by these two brothers called the Ray brothers, who were in the funeral business. And so they bought the home and converted it into Montreal's funeral home for the Protestant community. And I'm talking about some very wealthy members of this community who were pretty much in charge of the town during that period of our history. And there's all these crazy rumors of like necrophilia happening in the funeral home, and just like deranged stories like this. And eventually it was finally sold in the 70s to a series of different nightclub owners, and it's changed names over the years. Club Le Cinq, Club 1234, which is the address, 1234 de la Montagne, the World Beat Complex, Club L'Esprit, which means Club the Spirit. And apparently in the 70s, when the first person who was renovating it into a nightclub, he received complaints one day from his workers that they had seen this sort of orb floating around through the establishment, and he thought it was nonsense. He didn't believe in ghosts. But that night when he returned to the nightclub, which was under renovation, he saw this slender woman in a velvet black dress sitting at the bar, even though the bar wasn't open yet. And she was turned away from him. And he thought that was really bizarre. Of course. There wasn't even a bartender or like anything, And so he taps her on the shoulder. And when she turns around, this guy almost fell off his feet because the lady had no face.
Okay, shut up. I just got chills. I've had an experience just like that with no face.
Okay, well, chills. You know what I'm talking about then, right? We're talking it looks like a skull,
continue.
Tendons, whatever, like eyeballs, but there's no skin, it's like she's been autopsied, and so anyway, this guy, he gave up on the venture. He quit. He was so freaked out, and ever since then, it's been like all these different clubs, and all these different stories, and apparently all 3 floors of the nightclub are haunted, and so you start in the basement. And the story is horrible because if you're a woman and you have to go to the washroom, the ladies' washroom is where the old mortuary used to be. And so, and so there's all these stories of like a poor young woman going there, and she'll encounter this ghost of a woman who has a jagged scar going from her thorax all the way down to her abdomen, as if she has been autopsied. And so there's many stories of that happening in the ladies' washroom. You can see this on all those television programs I mentioned. Then you go up to the main floor. That one's probably the safest. But the odd thing there is that this table flies across the room for no apparent reason sometimes.
Poltergeist.
And apparently, that table was right by the coat check. And apparently it's where they used to have the slab for the corpse viewing, and now these tables just go flying. But the worst part of it is the attic, which is upstairs, and that's very much off limits for obvious reasons. I mean, in the past, you would have a lot of complainants on the sidewalk talking about seeing a skeletal woman in the dusty attic's window, and today it's all boarded up. You can see the boards when you walk by the nightclub, but they boarded them up for a different reason. It wasn't just because of those complaints of the spectral woman, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. But before that, just a few other examples in the attic. One day a staff member went up on a dare and arrived in the attic and felt like a very unwelcome presence. I'm talking about shadows moving about the walls and that type of thing. And so, the staff member retreated. In another case, Prince, the superstar, was partying in the nightclub, and his bouncer or his bodyguard was looking for him and went up to the attic, maybe by mistake, or maybe he thought he was there. I don't know the whole story. And when he got there, he felt so freaked out by being in the attic that he got goosebumps like all over his body, spine tingling fear. And this didn't subside for a whole week after he left that attic. And so, you have these stories like this. But the worst of them all, and this one is just horrible. This is why they put the boards on the window. I mean, in the 2000s, there was a girl in the club who was partying, and she'd heard rumors about the attic, as a lot of people had, and she asked permission if she could go up there, and they said no, it's off limits. That's why the door says do not enter. And so, needless to say, when they had their backs turned to her, she went up regardless. And about a minute later, they heard this piercing scream from the attic. It was so loud that literally it was louder than the music on the dance floor. Wow. Hysterical screaming, okay? And then she actually dove through the fucking plate glass window, okay? And this is a true story. I have the bouncer's account of it, And there's this huge balcony, right? And so she landed on the balcony and then dove off the balcony. She was that terrified.
That's crazy.
And thank God, down below the balcony, the bouncers were there. And because she had already jumped, they were ready to catch her. And they did, and so that saved her any further injury. But that's why they boarded up the windows. They thought this is just getting too dangerous. Needless to say, the bouncers tried their best to calm her down, but they couldn't, and she had to be taken away in an ambulance. And so these are just a couple of the stories from only one of the more than 40 haunted drinking establishments in Montreal.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the things on your blog here. Did anybody ever figure out what it is that she saw that made her jump out the window?
Nope.
Okay.
Nobody ever figured that out, But it's funny that you're looking at the blog, because I've already got 3 news stories just from people who read this who said, well, wait a minute, my drinking establishment's haunted too. And so I was invited to a place called the House of Jazz the other night. And this is a place where many, many famous musicians played and things like that. And they insisted that the place is haunted by the ghost of the former owner. And so, that's going to be one to study a bit more and maybe blog it up. Because, it's like I said, we do a lot of research and we hear a lot of news stories all the time. And we always make the effort to send someone over to investigate that, and it's not always me. I'm a busy person. I'm a teacher, and, our team is now about 20 people, including actors, administrators, researchers, archivists. And we take our work very seriously at Haunted Montreal.
That's awesome that you're doing that. I have mad respect for you, man.
We also pay union-based wages, and that's the great thing about this business is there's very little overhead. It's walking tours, so we don't have an office, for example. It's all virtually done,
Okay.
And at the same time, we can pay actors union-based wages on a regular basis. We can pay high wages to graphic artists. We can pay great wages marketers and administrators and things like that. And so it's not just a project about business, and culture. It's also a project about supporting workers' rights and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So when you were just growing up, before this even happened, have you had a paranormal experience, like any houses that you've lived in were haunted or anything like that?
Oh, it's funny you should mention that. Both my mother and father live in separate haunted houses. And the father's in the Laurentians and the mother's down in Malone, New York. So it's funny, they're both in the mountains on either side of the valley that I live in, the St. Lawrence Valley. And in his case, there was a DJ in the 80s who hanged himself in the house. And I guess his business went sour or something like that. And so they got it for a fire sale because no one wanted to buy it because of the story, And so there's been all these crazy stories I've heard from them up there, like his girlfriend levitating on the bed, over the bed, waking up like that, and feeling people pulling her feet at night, and just creepy stuff like that. And then in my mother's case down in Malone, she lives in a place she also got at a great deal, and it's because the fellow who owned it before her, we call him the Admiral. There's actually a picture of him on the wall in her garage, and he was a Navy man, and apparently he descended into alcoholism and ended up shooting himself in the head one night by the fireplace. Outdoors, like an outdoor fire pit. So there's all these like rumors of ghosts haunting these places, and this is today I'm talking about. When I grew up, there weren't any ghosts in my houses that I was aware of, but I now live in this 1885 building on Saint Denis Street. And, for sure it's an old building, and there are some rumors that it's haunted. Like my roommate is convinced that it's haunted,
So there's something here called Hurleys Irish Pub where someone's screaming out for help. Can you tell me about that story a little bit?
Yeah, that's an amazing story. I mean, I was just... Jesus, I've been going to Hurleys Pub for decades, and I didn't know the story until I told them I wanted to do the haunted pub crawl, and I started to ask them, is your pub haunted? And they started to sort of slowly tell me the story, and it came out in bits and pieces because obviously they're not super comfortable with it themselves. And so essentially where the pub is today, it was originally built as a tenement home back in the 1800s. And a tenement home is a home for poor laborers. And so a lot of Irish and Scottish people living in this home in Montreal. And so one day, the manager, Rod, and Rod's been there since the beginning. The pub has been open since the early 90s, and so he's been there over 25 years. And one day he sees this old man come in, about 80. He's all misty-eyed. He's wistful. He's not ordering a drink. He's looking around, And so Rod's curious, and he's like, "Sir, can I help you?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, I used to live here when it was a tenement home. I grew up here with my family. It was horrible. It was infested with rats and cockroaches. There was fires in the building, things like that. Eventually, we saved enough money to move to Ontario." But he wanted to revisit his childhood home. And of course, now it's Hurleys Pub. And so, there's all these stories about this tenement, especially about fires in the building. And what's interesting is that when they, as the pub grew and they made more profits, they purchased the higher levels of the building so they could expand the pub, right? Mm-hmm. And as it went up, they started to notice the infrastructure was charred. All of the beams were burnt out by the previous fires. And so they had to replace all of that, obviously, for safety reasons. But they kept just one of the charred beams which is over this doorway by the ladies' washroom. And it's just sort of as a reminder of the past. It's not a structural beam. It's just decorative. And so they thought, well, we'll keep that just as a reminder. And so Bill Hurley, the man who owns the pub, he has a story about meeting a man who lived in the tenement across from what's now the pub about 60 years ago, who recalled seeing a fire in the building. And up on the second floor, he recalled seeing this lady screaming, help me, during one of these fires, because she herself was on fire and in a burning room. And apparently this poor lady died in the blaze. And so today in that area, there's all these stories about like her footsteps going up and down the stairs, phantom footsteps, the smell of this old perfume wafting through the air that's no longer manufactured. There's a story of one night they were downstairs at 3:15 a.m., both Bill Hurley, the owner, and Rod, the manager, plus a woman who was a friend of theirs. She went upstairs to the ladies' washroom, and when she was up there, she saw a woman sitting at the bar upstairs, which was very odd because they thought everyone was gone. And so when she went downstairs to report this, they both ran up on either side. Like the pub's a maze. There's all these staircases everywhere and nooks and crannies and things. And so they arrived on the scene at the same time on either side of where she should have been, but there was nobody there. There was just the stool moved out as if someone had been sitting there. Yeah. But the weirdest story is really bad, And this happened in the 2000s. They were having a staff meeting in the month of January. They were downstairs discussing the latest sales, the upcoming schedule of the live music every night, welcoming new staff members and that sort of thing in a regular staff meeting. And all of a sudden they heard a noise that was quite faint coming from upstairs. And it got louder and louder. And it was a woman's voice screaming, help me, let me out, and this type of thing. And so they ran upstairs and they heard the voice coming from the ladies' washroom. Ran into the washroom and they could hear the voice screaming there, but there was no one there. And they thought, is it coming from behind the wall? Is there a secret room? This is a really old building. And they couldn't figure it out. And finally they went back down and everyone was so perturbed because the voice just wouldn't stop screaming that they decided to abandon the whole meeting and scrap it, and reschedule it.
That's terrifying.
And, yeah, and they theorized that maybe that was the anniversary because Bill remembered hearing the story of when it happened. They thought that maybe it's the anniversary of the woman's death, and that's on a certain day in January. The pub doesn't want to let it out, obviously, because otherwise you'll get all these ghost hunters there. But they decided they're not going to schedule any more meetings on that particular date, which they think is the anniversary of this horrific tenement fire.
Wow, I'm over here so scared right now, just listening to that story.
Yeah, and we end our pub crawl at that place, and we only heard that story about a month ago as we were developing the tour because obviously we're looking for haunted pubs. We don't want just any old place, and this actually has the evidence of the burnt out beam, so it's quite creepy for the clients. And they also give us a private area upstairs in the pub where the lady was spotted right beside the washroom, and it's also kind of like an Irish snug. There's a little fireplace and comfortable chairs and all the rest, so it's really ideal.
Nice. So what do you think happens to our consciousness after we die?
Well, I'll be honest with you, I'm a bit of a ghost agnostic, a religious agnostic, and I'm comfortable saying that I have no idea. And, I'm going to just figure that out when I get there, if anything happens. But, there's so many stories about, people coming back to haunt the place. There's other religious stories of people going to heaven or hell. So I really don't know what's going to happen, but I'm certainly interested in the topic.
Okay. Have you ever had any near-death experience before?
Not really. I mean, I'll be honest with you in saying that, like, I suffer from an illness called major depressive disorder. And so sometimes I felt like so low I wanted to die, but I wouldn't say I've ever had a near-death experience as though I was about to be hit by a train or something along those lines.
My dad was actually hit by a train and survived.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he has a metal plate in his head. Well, that's interesting. So
Yeah.
you've only just been had suicidal type of thoughts. I've been there for sure.
Yeah, I think any creative type has been, especially in a society as messed up as our own.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough to go through those types of experiences. It's really hard to get out of that dark pit of despair. But it's ironic that I study all these ghost stories and things like that, which are of course along the same genre.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's therapeutic. Who knows?
It is, just to think about what could possibly happen. So I actually had a similar experience to what's going on at Barfly, where the music just turns on out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So I used to work at this hair salon. I had a tattoo shop in there, and I believe it was the anniversary of my grandmother's death. And I went out to the main area where all the hair salon products and everything was, and the radio just turned on out of nowhere. And then an hour before that I was like, oh my God, I don't have any music because my laptop broke. It was so weird.
Okay.
And then an hour later it just shut off on its own. Come to find out the next day it wasn't even plugged in.
Huh.
So what's going on at Barfly? Have you've been there, I would assume, right?
Oh yeah, so many times. We used to run our Haunted Montreal tour out of the Barfly, so we would start there, and we would go up the mountain, and the mountain is called Odzirage in the indigenous language, which is Ganyangea, or the Mohawk language, or it was renamed Mount Royal in 1535 by Jacques Cartier, a French explorer. And the weird thing is, nobody knows the original name, including the people who run the mountain, as a tourist attraction. And so we were running it out of the Barfly, and we've since changed locations because honestly, the Barfly, we love it. It wins the Dive Bar of the Year award every year, and so we would have these clients coming in from the suburbs, and they're shocked, because the bathroom is covered in graffiti, it smells like piss, and it's like a proper dive bar,
Mm-hmm.
But it's also extremely haunted. And so apparently, in the past, the building has been many different bars, kind of like Hurleys, and the owner before the Barfly was this fellow, and he was this kind of crazy American guy. He came up from Brooklyn. He was a bit like a bulldog, very scrappy, in your face, and he opened up his bar. And he broke every rule you could imagine. He pirated electricity. He stole music. He kept his bar open after hours by simply locking the door. And all of these things. But he also was a real character. He had one of those old chrome fridges. He would sell his beer out of that, and so if you arrived too late, it was warm because he only had one fridge for it.
Mm-hmm.
And he would bring in these people from the States, Pine Top Perkins, and all the blues musicians and all that type of stuff. And so the sad thing is that one day he was having lunch at a place called the Euro Deli on the Main, or Saint Laurent Boulevard. It was a street fair, so it was all pedestrianized. And he ended up having a heart attack over his spaghetti at the restaurant, and he died, And so it was kind of sad, because also, to make matters worse, he had gone bankrupt a few years earlier because of his transgressions. And, the authorities caught up with him. And so he ended up becoming a regular at the Barfly when that opened. And the Barfly is owned by my friend Anthony, who's this Danish guy, who's moved over here many years ago. And he really caters to the locals. You go into the Barfly, there's always the local color, people with their dogs, things like that. And it's a super interesting bar because he also has a music act every night. And so it's really good for local up-and-coming bands. And despite all the oppression in the neighborhood, they've closed down so many small venues. He's very lucky in that, his bar is situated in such a way that there won't be noise complaints because of the buildings surrounding him. And so he's been able to continue. And but the problem is there's all these stories of ghosts or a ghost haunting the bar. And usually it's at closing time that it happens. And here we're talking about, as you mentioned, things like they'll turn the stereo off, or unplug it, and suddenly it's playing music again. You've got the bar stools, which they put up in that bar, flying across the bar, as if they're refusing the closing time. Mm-hmm. You have the lights coming back on. You have all of this type of resistance that the bar's closing, the lock, when they try to lock it to go home, unlocks itself and things like that. And there's been other stories of kind of lightning flashes in the bar and just all these weird stories. But needless to say, they think that the ghost is the old owner who is still insisting on doing things his way, not legally. And so that's why there's such a hard time at 3 a.m. when they want to close the place.
Right at the witching hour.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, I love the Barfly. It's just, they've done so many infringement festival shows over the years.
I think that's where I played when I was invited out.
There you go.
Pretty sure, now that I'm thinking about it. So I just want to ask some questions about another topic. I'm just going to switch here. So when it comes to life existing outside of our planet, do you think that the possibility of aliens or extraterrestrials is... Do you believe in something like that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, I'm kind of agnostic on that because I just don't know. But I think logically, it's quite likely there's many other, life forms in the universe. I mean, we know for a fact that meteorites carry microbes and things like that. And we also know for a fact that, Earth was created from microbes. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there's all sorts of life in the universe. To me, it would make very little sense that only one planet has this type of activity on it. And so I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of life out there. I just don't know what it is, and mm-hmm. There's also been many UFO sightings in Montreal. The most famous one happened at the Hotel Bonaventure back in the 70s, I think it was, or maybe it was the 80s. But this lady was swimming and she saw this huge UFO hovering over the hotel, Mm-hmm. They have a beautiful rooftop pool. It's heated. It's wonderful, And, she alerted the lifeguard and he called the security guard. And he called the police, and they called the RCMP, and they called NASA. And there's all these amazing stories that I dug up and blogged on the Haunted Montreal blog about the inspector arriving and they're trying to figure this out, and here's this gigantic UFO hovering over the building. They have pictures of it too, and eventually it flew off. And to this day, it's considered one of Canada's most documented UFO sightings. The journalists were on it, and there's been a lot of other UFO sightings in Montreal too. So, is there aliens out there? I think yes, there probably is. But again, without solid proof, there's that agnostic side of me that says, until I see the proof, mm-hmm. I'm not by it, you know?
I've seen gray aliens twice in person. It's kind of terrifying. But
Is that right?
Yeah, I was near wooded areas late at night. One time I was out running, and the other time I was fire keeping, so I had to go into the woods to break off deadfall and pick up twigs. And the first time it looked just like a small gray with the big cranium, the big black eyes, and it shifted its weight in front of me in the woods, and I just ran. I wasn't afraid, but I didn't want to get abducted. So I ran back to the fire and told my friends, and 2 hours later, our group had split off earlier, and then 2 hours later, the other part of the group came back, and they said that the younger girl, she was like 13, she had seen a white figure in the woods. And I was like, what? It was like around the same time I had seen it. And then it was November 15th, 2015. I was out running, and midnight, it looked just like a tall gray alien floated out from the bushes, and it was a foot off the ground, and then it ran like a gorilla on all fours to the edge of Grennan and Richmond, and then stood up on its legs like a human, looked at me, and then ran on all fours to the left, disappeared. I ran the entire way home, terrified. I thought I was going to die, literally. But then the more research I do, it sounds like what would be described as the rake, R-A-K-E, and they're known to run on all fours and look like a tall gray alien. So it was really terrifying, actually. But, you know, you do have to see things in person to really create the belief, you know? But, yeah, that was scary. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, can I tell you about one of my most paranormal experiences?
For sure. That's what this show's all about, man.
Perfect. So I was working in the London dungeon in the sort of early 90s, early to mid 90s, maybe 94 or something like that, to 96, I don't know. And you know, it was amazing. They hired me as a 23-year-old kid to run the largest horror attraction in the world, at least for the entertainment side of things, not all the tickets and all that BS, you know, but just the actors and the quality of the entertainment and whatever. Mm-hmm. And so at first it was a really sketchy place. You know, they were hiring people through the job center, people with no acting experience or who just didn't give a shit, you know, or who sexually harassed the clients or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to turn it around, and it took a couple of years, and I did, you know, and today it's like acting is one of the main features of this attraction in London. And but you know, it was rough in those early years turning it around, and so I was pretty much in charge of a lot of weird things. Like, for example, they thought that the actors should also sweep the dungeon, you know, because they called them warders. So they weren't professional entertainers. They were kind of like, you know, custodians of the dungeon, and they would like herd the tourists around and whatever, you know. Okay. And so part of my job was to open it up every day and close it at the end of the day. And that involved, you know, turning on a lot of, you know, power sources and things. There's a lot of special effects, holograms, animatronics, even things like fireballs blowing out of the door, you know. And so it was, you know, quite complicated technologically to set it up, sound effects, you know, and whatever. And, you know, it took a long time to learn how to do that. And so that was part of my job. But the sweet part was there was a very low-tech component to it. And that was these church candles. You know the type I'm talking about in a church? Mm-hmm. It's about the size of a Grolsch can. And, you know, it's like you can pay some money to light that and, you know, say a prayer or whatever. It's like a solid, thick church candle. Yeah. And so we had about 12 racks, like these wrought iron metal racks throughout the dungeon with these candles on them. And you could stick about 8 candles on each rack, you know. And so this was just like an effect, you know. It was kind of a weird lighting effect that gave authenticity to this dungeon. And so my job every day in the morning was to relight them for the day's activity and to blow them out at the end of the day. That was just part of my task, and a very welcome task given all of the technology. And I'm not super comfortable with that stuff, you know. Mm-hmm. I'm not an expert by any means. And so what was weird is that on many occasions, when I would blow these candles out at the end of the night and come back the next morning, the candles had relit.
Okay.
In one certain part of the dungeon only. So it was only like maybe 2 racks of the 12 that would relight themselves.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, this is fucked up, Is this a joke? Is someone playing a prank, And so I thought, who has the keys, And it was me. It was the manager. She was terrified of the dungeon. It was literally rat infested. Like, she stayed in her office, which was all proper. She would only go down there if it was an urgent issue or if she had to lead a media tour. I thought it could be the technician. Now, he was an alcoholic, and, it was funny. He would hire me to come in to do some work, and we would end up at the pub all night. We wouldn't do any work, and then he would report that, there was some sort of delay, to the office. And so I thought, why on earth would he come in here? He doesn't even do his work when he's on the payroll, And so then I thought, well, maybe it's my deputy. And I had 2 deputies. And so I asked them about this. And they said that they had the same experiences as well of these candles relighting, And I was like, okay, this is crazy. So I started researching, and I found out that the dungeon, which, by the way, isn't even a real dungeon. It was the underside of London Bridge train station. Today it's been moved to a different building. But at the time, this building had served as stables, breweries, going back to the 1800s, Victorian eras, and warehousing. But it was also a bomb shelter in World War II. And apparently a bomb had hit the station and killed over 50 people at the area where these candles were relighting themselves. And that was at a part of the dungeon that they had prepared as what they call the Jack the Ripper experience. And so it was all about the horrors of the Victorian murders of Jack the Ripper, so they would sort of tell you that story through walking through that type of environment with the fog and the gas lights and screen projections of the tale, and you would see the bodies of the women, and then at the end you were in a mortuary, and this fireball would explode. It was a pretty crazy experience, and that was where the candles kept relighting. And I thought, oh my God, maybe it's those people who died in the war trying to commemorate themselves. But again, I have no proof 100%. I have my theories, but unless I have my proof, that's how skeptical I am, Kanaska. I'm not the kind of guy who's just gonna accept something willingly.
What's your gut telling you?
Yeah, if some Mormon comes to my door and says, "Oh, you have to join this religion," I won't buy it. It's I need the proof. And to me, there's a lot of small elements of proof that appear, but I'm still kind of on the fence because I need that 100%, you've had, seeing actual aliens or the whatever paranormal thing with your own eyes.
Yes, like with the no face guy. That was so terrifying. I was 15 years old, and I was actually reading a book about ghosts at the time in my brother's room. I don't think he was home. And so the way it was set up, there's my bed, and then to my left is a huge window, and then 1 floor down there's grass and then a parking lot. And I could feel something staring at me. So I look at the window and I look down 1 floor, and there's an old man standing there, and he has the most evil smile, but no face, no eyes, no nose. And then I ducked down for a minute, and I went up to look again, and he was closer and the smile was bigger. So I ducked down for 10 seconds, went back up, he was gone. Disappeared. I checked all around the building. He was gone. Unless he's a sprinter with no face that got blown off in the war or something. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure it was like a demon or something like that. It was pretty terrifying. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about Cafe Cleopatra. It seems like somebody had their private parts blown off by a bomb.
Yeah. The Cafe Cleopatra, I love it. This is a place that goes back to the 1880s, you know, and it was Canada's first gay bar, Canada's first bar that accepted transsexual performers and drag shows. And, you know, it was also a bar that was involved in a lot of criminal activities, you know. I mean, Canada was a place that did accept prohibition like the States, but Montreal didn't, you know. In Quebec, they said, you know, we can't really outlaw alcohol because it was a Catholic province. And of course, wine is equal to the blood of Christ in this religion. You know, so this is my religion being Irish, or at least by birth or whatever. I got as far as the baptism, and that was about it. But yeah, you couldn't outlaw that here. And so it became this major crime hub. Al Capone was here. And there's all these ghost stories of the red light district back in the heyday. You know, it had its sort of funny points where people laugh about it and celebrate, you know, the old mafia stuff and all that. But there's also a real dark side of human trafficking. I mean, there was like 500 prostitutes on the corner of St. Laurent and St. Catherine Street. And so there's all these ghost stories related to that era. But what's cool about the Café Cleopatra is that there was a big fight to save the building about a decade ago. And I was involved in that along with many of the other burlesque performers in town. And this developer had bought the whole block and he was going to demolish everything. And like he had the mayor in his pocket. And so they were trying to expropriate it. Now, the owner of the cafe decided to fight back, and we fought back on his side as the artists. And so I was the historian, we had the burlesque queens, we had the drag queens, we had like all of the people who had been performing in the club continuously since the 1800s. And amazingly, we won the fight. And today, the Café Cleopatra is this amazing old building that's surrounded by a glass office tower. They're building the tower around the cafe, literally. Nice. And that's under construction right now. And so, you know, there's a lot of stories of ghosts in the building for sure. But like one of the stories is about this guy who had his private parts blown off in the toilet, you know, and someone had planted a bomb in the toilet. And this is why his genitalia was kind of, I guess, mutilated or whatever you want to call it.
Was there like a penis ghost or something? No.
I don't know the exact story of. It's funny, like the Catholic. There's so many people with so many theories that I haven't been able to pinpoint it yet. Like that's one of the places I haven't put a lot of study into. It's ghosts, but it's on my list. Trust me, it's like really interesting, the stuff that's gone down there.
Cool. So if you were given like the option to live forever, would you want to, or would you just want to live like a regular human life?
I think I would like to live forever, to be honest, you know, because life is too short, you know. I mean, we change so much over our lifetime, and it also seems like the older you get, the faster the time goes. You know, when you're like a 13-year-old, you just can't wait until you're like an adult, you know, and it seems to take forever. But when you're like 46, like me, it's just like the years are just ticking by, you know, and it's like, oh my God, what's happening here, you know? And
yeah.
You're doing your best, right? And you're trying to do what you can, but you never feel like there's enough time. And so
you have plenty of time left, man. It's not you're not 90 or anything like that, right? You're still good to go.
No, but I'll be honest with you, Kanaska. I wouldn't be surprised if within our lifetimes they invent a way to somewhat immortalize us. And by that, I'm talking about sort of a download of our like soul or brain or personality or whatever you want to call it onto like a virtual platform. You know what I'm saying? And it's just so interesting to see the way the technology is developing. And then if you get the AI going that can develop it faster, you never know, I mean, even within our lifetime, we might be able to like clone ourselves or
Mm-hmm.
put ourselves, like download our personality onto a computer and exist that like in the virtual world or whatever. Like there's all sorts of possibilities. And so we're just going to have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, it'd be cool if we could just clone ourselves and then take our soul, put it in a younger body.
Exactly.
Be like,
Yeah.
all
It's
right.
like that's going to be possible. I mean, like the way they're developing stuff so fast, like, they're making like artificial organs based on your own DNA, and like they're doing all these
Mm-hmm.
crazy things. So we got to hope that that'll be accessible to us if it is developed, because of course we do live in a very capitalistic and often racist type of society, and so.
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to be available to the average person in the future if it's developed, or is it only going to be for the rich,
The
or
elite.
whatever? We don't know. And so that's why I'm a big social justice advocate. I think we have to not only, have our fun with the paranormal and our research, but we also have to advocate for the, improvements in the tourism industry to make it more inclusive.
You were mentioning something earlier, something about systemic racism. If you wanted to just touch on that, what your thoughts were?
In Montreal, there's this bylaw called G2 that makes it illegal for anyone to be a tour guide unless they go through this program, right? And the program is by what they call the ETHQ, the Institut de Tourisme et Hôtellerie du Québec, which they claim on their website is Canada's best tourism school. Now, one day I was in Old Montreal. Like, I'm a qualified history teacher. That's my job, And so I was in Old Montreal with some students, leading them through the Notre Dame Basilica. And this little lady, this is in the wedding chapel, starts screeching at me through like a telemarketer style microphone. And she's like, Monsieur, vous n'avez pas le droit de faire une visite guidée sans permis. And she's waving this permit at me. And she's saying, I can't do this without a permit. And I'm like, I'm a history teacher. Like, what the hell,
Mm-hmm.
So I go online. I find out that technically she's correct. Because of this bylaw, you're not allowed to do a guided tour as a history teacher, as a Mohawk elder, as like a member of the LGBTQ community, someone with a unique perspective, someone who's authentic. It's illegal to do the tour unless you do the program, And
Of course,
so
they want you to buy your rights back, basically.
exactly. And to me, I'm thinking this is crazy, I mean, I'm a history teacher and I'm not allowed to give a history tour.
Wow.
And so I'm thinking, charter rights, freedom of expression, freedom of association. I thought how ironic it was that when Jacques Cartier arrived in 1535 to the island of Tiohtià:ke, which is today's Montreal, it's unceded indigenous territory. They've never signed it away in a treaty or anything. So he requests permission to go to the top of the mountain. Odzirage is the name of the mountain in the Ganyangeya language, or the Mohawk language. So he goes up, and he's such an arrogant prick that he renames it Mount Royal, after the French king Francois I, So like he's literally led by indigenous tour guides who aren't legally allowed to give a tour on the island today, and he renames it Mount Royal, and today most people don't know the original name, they're not promoting it on the signs, on the website, or anything else. And it just amazes me to think that this group of people has somehow thought that they can get a monopoly on tour guiding, which is probably the world's most ancient art form. It's a performance where you're walking and telling people about things. You're telling them about landmarks and about historical things that have happened, and like significance to sites in terms of spirituality or whatever. And so this is probably the world's most ancient art form. And to think that like these like Mohawk guides led Jacques Cartier to the top of the mountain in 1535, And then he renames their mountain, you know, and today it's illegal for them to give a guided tour unless they complete this program. Now, I did the program, Kanaska. You know me, I'm crazy enough to actually do it, you know, and I wanted to like check it out, you know.
Yeah.
So I had to get past these two gatekeepers who were both white, you know.
Oh, God. So
Yeah,
sweet.
and then I had to drop $2,000, 8 months of my time to do the program. And don't get me wrong, some elements were a lot of fun. Some elements were great. You know, we practiced being the bus guide and things like that. But some elements are really unacceptable. I mean, the history course totally glossed over the First Nations reality. You know, it's I'm talking about the pre-colonial history, whose territory we're on, the name of the territory, any of the Mohawk language, not a single word. You know, and this is the UN year of Indigenous languages. Our guides cannot even say hello in the Mohawk language. It's super embarrassing. It's so
You're not
colonial.
allowed to do that?
They just can't. They were never educated to, you know? And so it's like a big problem. And also because it's a monopoly, it's mostly white, you know? And so we're talking about settler privilege here and settler fragility. Money. And so anytime you try to talk about this, you know, people, you know, leave the conversation, they shut down, they get offended, whatever. But like we really need to diversify Montreal's tour guiding industry because there's so many amazing stories from the Black community, from the Indigenous communities here, the disabled communities, the homeless communities, the refugee communities, the immigrant communities, the ethnic communities, the cultural communities. None of these people are legally allowed to tour guide unless they do this very questionable and Eurocentric program. And so it's got to change. You know, and it's tough. You know, we're fighting this issue on the ground, and there's a lot of discrimination, a lot of exclusion. All these people are unfriending me because of my political opinion, you know. They banned me from going to their annual general meeting at the, what's called the APGT, the Association Professionnelle des Guides Touristiques, even though I was a paying member. And I even had to get my lawyer, human rights attorney, Julius Gray, to send them a letter reinstating me into the organization because I'd been excluded from communications, blocked from Facebook, etc., simply for trying to bring up Indigenous issues of truth and reconciliation in the tourism industry. And
how dare you speak the truth?
Exactly. And so I'll be honest with you, it's super tough going, but at the same time, it's also super important. And that's why I'm forging ahead. And I have the support even of professors at the ETHQ and some of Montreal's most famous history professors. I have the support, for example, of many members of the Mohawk community. I also have assurances from the ETHQ and Tourisme Montréal that they are actually going to start updating their stuff. You know, it's a matter now of asking like, oh yeah, you know, how are you going to do it? You know, when's it going to be done by? Is this going to be approved by First Nations people or not? And so we're getting the ball rolling, you know, but the worst of the worst is the APGT, the Association of Tour Guides. Like they wouldn't even let me into their general meeting. And like the woman in charge was threatening to phone the police.
Wow.
And you know, even though I was a paying member, you know, and she's like, you're harassing us and blah, blah, blah. And you know me, Kanaska, I'm a theater activist, you know, like I try to get the point across, whether it's through a culture jam or an electronic disturbance theater or invisible theater or radical dramaturgy or whatever technique, you know, I can match to the situation. And here they're saying that, oh, he's harassing us, you know, and blah, blah, blah. He's intimidating us. And they're trying to paint me as like this dangerous lunatic, you know, and it's so disappointing because I've seen this before with the Fringe Festival. I've seen it at the University of Calgary. But, eventually things come around. Recently the University of Calgary has conceded that I'm a thought leader and an innovator in my fields, and so it took like 20 years to get there, I mean, back in the day, they said I belonged in a mental hospital and not a drama department.
Well, if you do, I definitely do as well, because I'm way crazier than you are.
There we go.
So I just want to ask you a couple questions in regards to how do you think we can make our world a better place to live in? What do you think our world needs to do in order to just create a happier existence for one another?
Yeah, very good questions. I mean, honestly, a lot of my work is based on trying to update what I call oppressive systems. And so oftentimes we're in a situation where the field is discriminating against us just because of who we are, and because of issues like colonization or racism or sexism or homophobia or things like that. And sometimes you have to actually challenge the entire system, and that's what I'm doing right now with this kind of systemic racist tourism system in Montreal, right? And so you've got this trinity of toxicity. You've got the tour guiding school, which is training the guides. They're sending them to the tour guiding association, which are doing the tours. And this is promoted by Tourism Montreal. And it's all exclusive, right? So you can't participate unless you're in this system. And even when I got into the system, I was discriminated against because I spoke out against it. But it's like a problem of systemic racism and settler privilege. And so to me, it's better to just try to crack the system and dismantle it and replace it with an inclusive system than to accept it. And so sometimes you have to just change things if you can, Mm-hmm. And for me, I use theater activism to do this. And, at the Fringe Festival, we're in the same type of situation. We're challenging late capitalism. They've tried to buy off the Fringe to make all these profits on a pyramid scheme, in a sense, and so they're blocking all communications with activists, and it's sort of a corporate cheerleading event. And so we're challenging that as well using theater activism, and they're saying the same thing. Oh, we're dangerous, they're harassing us, blah, 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 blah.
It's just because you have an opinion and you want things to change for the better. That's not harassment, though.
Exactly. And so that's what I think. If everyone did that, if everyone stood up to oppressions, because like we often see one person standing up to one oppression, right? Or you see like one issue coming up, like the Me Too movement, but you never see everyone just saying, you know what, we're going to just deal with oppression in all its forms. We're going to stop it, and whether that's through structural problems in the workplace, through late capitalism in the world, through like gender issues or whatever issues there might be, like instead of just going after them one by one, I think we need to get to the point where, like, as a human psychology, we just reject it all. And I think that's before us, I mean, like the Me Too movement could never have existed without the internet, for example. And so if you think of the power of that, what happens when the crazy mentally disabled people like us start demanding things,
Kind of reminds me of when I was at New York at the Occupy Wall Street movement. Everybody there had a different issue. It wasn't just about... They kind of spun it to seem like it was the 99% against the 1%, but there were so many people there that didn't hate rich people, and they just wanted racism to end, or they wanted for there to be, more tax breaks for people of the middle class. They wanted for medication to be more affordable. There's just so many issues that it's hard to really pin down to just one thing, because our world is so messed up. But there is a lot of good there as well.
Yeah, and like in our theatrical theory, we have what we call the provocateur, who's like this clown-like actor who just stirs shit up, And, I think if everyone tried just a little bit of that once in a while.
Humor to get the point across is fun.
It is humor, and a lot of people don't get it, or they refuse to get it because they're challenged, but you have to keep it theatrical, you have to keep it kind of fun, but you also have to challenge the oppressions that exist. And I'm thinking of the Yes Men, Michael Moore, Adbusters, all of these movements of performance and culture jamming of images and whatnot. This is kind of like the icebreaker, it's kind of the intro to, but eventually if people can kind of get into that mood of things of like, I'm not going to accept this, for example, I was at the bank and they were trying to sell me all this bullshit. And so I caused a huge fucking scene right there on the floor, and it embarrassed them. And
you
it's
started
like,
breakdancing? Why is he breakdancing? I'm causing a scene.
Yeah. And it's like, they're going to put on this corporate performance for me where they're trying to sell me a credit card and making all these false promises. And I'm going to put on a counter performance and have a meltdown like in the bank or whatever, and it's like the more you do this, the sooner the banks are going to realize, okay, we shouldn't be we shouldn't be like fucking these people over when they're simply trying to withdraw money or whatever. And, like we're going to give them a sales pitch or whatever.
It's funny that you bring up Michael Moore. I actually ended up being on an album with him because of the Occupy Wall Street protest. And he's got a lot of interesting things to say for sure in regards to how messed up our world is. What would you say is one of the best issues he's touched on that you think needs to be talked about more?
I think late capitalism needs to be talked about a lot, to be honest. And, if we could handle that one topic, I think all the other topics would fall into place, to be honest. It's crazy to think that in the 21st century, the world is so fucked up, but like the funny thing about late capitalism is it's kind of breathing its final gasps, I believe. And for me, the best example is the Fringe Festival. So in 1947, these artists protest against another festival that won't let them in, called the Edinburgh International Festival. And they threaten, we're going to play on the Fringe. And they do, And so it becomes like the largest festival in the world for the arts. It's supposed to be rebellious and do it yourself and like fuck the man and all of that. And then, like, it starts getting trademarked, and people are, like, excluding people from doing it unless they pay fees. And they invent this, like, World Fringe Congress where they're trying to sell them a corporate ideology about how to run it, very much based on late capitalist ideals, with, like, fees being paid to the top of the structure. And, the exact opposite of the original Fringe Festival. And so I think if we can start to realize, like, just how fucked up things are, like, just it's clearly fucked up, right? If we can find a way to start retaking our Fringe, we can then move in and start retaking other systems. And I'm talking about all sorts of systems, business systems, marketing systems, health systems, education systems, whatever. But it's got to start at the fringe because like the late capitalism has crept right up to the very edge of everything we hold dear, metaphorically the fringe of our, existence. It's crazy.
So I have I have two questions left for you. If you could have any superpower, what would it be and why?
Oh, wow. That's such a weird question.
I know. I'm so weird. Just the way I roll.
I think I would like to be able to fly at will, to be honest. It's so weird. I have these weird dreams where I can just fly. And it's in the exact same way, like through a scuba apparatus, So like if I breathe in, I start floating up in the air, and if I breathe out, I start floating down.
You'd never have to pay for a plane again, ever.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's what I would like to do. It'd be awful great to, because in my dreams when I do this, and it's like a recurring dream, it's just so much easier to get around, You just breathe in and you're flying across the city, and then you breathe out and you land like at your workplace.
Okay. So, why do you think we're here? Like, what do you think is the purpose of our existence?
Oh my God, you got some tough ones. That's a very good question. I don't think there is necessarily a purpose to our existence, but I could be wrong. Again, I'm kind of agnostic on this point. I get the sense that, it's kind of weird. Like, you see these animals all eating each other and doing all these crazy things, and humans are trying to, on the one hand, they're the worst of the worst. They're destroying the whole world. But on the other hand, they're trying to argue for human rights and for, veganism or for whatever. So, I find humans are a really, really weird species, and I have no idea what our purpose is. I just haven't a clue, to be honest.
Yeah, maybe just to be kind to each other and have fun.
I hope so. I mean, I try
Smoke
to
a
make
ton
the
of
world
weed.
a better place, and I try to, be friendly and, have a good life as much as I can.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, I'm not, a believer in God or something. I don't believe that, our purpose is to not sin and to do whatever, I mean, it's not my bag.
It's not my bag, baby. Austin Powers. Okay, so do you have any links? If people want to reach out to you, they want to go to one of your tours, you want them to check out your website, how can they reach you?
Yeah, they have to just simply go to hauntedmontreal.com. And the website is in both English and French, and so we have those languages going. We're going to try to add some more. We're going to try to add a tour in Chinese soon. And, on our website, they can do two things. They can either read our blog. We publish it on the 13th of every month. It's free. And it's you can even subscribe to it. And that's like our sort of gift to the community of just trying to grow the interest in the haunted tourism here. I mean, we have over 250 ghost stories on our list, and we've blogged about 40 of them. And probably every month I add 2 or 3 more to the list. So it almost seems endless. And that's great, it just shows how haunted our city is. So there's that. But they can also look into one of our tours and book it if they want to come and attend, because, reading a story is very different from attending something by a professional actor and storyteller, being at the actual site where the ghost appeared. It's a very different experience. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, because we pay our actors union wages, we can also provide the lowest ticket price in the city. We're not here to be capitalists. We're here to grow this industry, grow the stories, because you can embed a lot of activist messages in ghost stories too. Mm-hmm. And so that's a big part of it. And we also donate a portion of our ticket sales for Indigenous causes in Montreal, because it's not fair that Indigenous people can't legally guide on their own territory. And so, we're more than happy to donate to things like the Native Women's Shelter or to settler reparations or things like that. And so I think, if we're going to beat late capitalism, we have to start with providing alternatives to it. And that's what this company tries to do. It tries to be fair. It tries to provide union-based wages. It doesn't destroy the environment. It's just walking and talking. And, we also teach history, and we also embed activist messages. So it's, it's kind of like an experiment,
Mm-hmm. Really proud of you, man, and everything that you're doing. You're doing a great job.
Hey, thank you so much,
awesome.
Kanaska.
All right. Well, I'm sure I'll see you on Facebook. And if you do any more shows in the future, please consider me as a performer, a singer-songwriter, because I would love to see you guys again for sure. And I think whenever I'm out in Montreal, I'll come check out your haunted tour and try to not be scared, but I don't know if that's going to happen.
Awesome. I'll be happy to comp you.
All right, man. Well, you have a great night, and I will talk to you soon.
Cool, man.
Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Ciao.
You're tuned to the Witching Hours on CKCU 93.1 FM in Ottawa. I'm your host, Kanaska Carter. Don't go anywhere, folks. We've got a great show coming up for you tonight.
You're listening to CKCU 93.1 FM in Ottawa.